everybody to the SASA Live Book Club. Today we are joined with Danielle Stinson, and she is going to talk about her book, Daughters of Bronze. Ashley, her co-author, can't join us today, but Danielle is going to brave all my questions. And we're going to have a great time talking about Daughters of Bronze. So before we get started, I am going to put up a little PowerPoint just to talk about who SASA is, what we're doing, why we're doing it. So let me introduce that to the chat here. Okay, so again, this is the Live Book Club talking about Daughters of Bronze. Save Ancient Studies Alliance is on a mission to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper pasts. Building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship, we work toward our goal of inspiring a wide, inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. You can follow us anywhere. So if you are super passionate about ancient studies, like me and Danielle are, you can follow us on all of our social media platforms. We do all kinds of live events and all kinds of like master classes and super, super nerdy history buff things. So if you're like us and you love those things, please follow us. Just some book club etiquette. We are live streaming on multiple platforms, and you are able to post questions in those chats wherever you're watching from. So just be kind and respectful. Ask thoughtful questions. If you have read Daughters of Bronze, please feel free to ask whatever questions you have to Danielle. And just be patient with technology because sometimes it gets a little wonky or the connection gets a little weird. So, and have fun. And then again, if you enjoy SASA's live events, please consider being a supporter of SASA. By donating to our cause. And I will have, there's a little QR code up in the left corner right now that you can scan, and it'll take us to your monthly subscription page. And I will also be putting up a QR code where you can purchase Daughters of Bronze from our SASA book club store on bookshop.org. And every purchase from our book club on our bookshop goes to support SASA as well. And we have tons and tons of awesome books that we've discussed during our live programs on there as well. And that's it. So let's get this out of here and let's jump straight into, let's jump straight into the questions. Okay, so.
Thank you for having me, MJ. And I'm so sorry that the more charming half of this duo is not here today. So I will do the best that I can to answer for both of us.
No worries. Please let her know that we missed her. So the first question is, in your own words, can you tell us what Daughters of Bronze is about?
Daughters of Bronze is a historical epic take on the Trojan War, so focusing on the events of the Iliad. And it puts female characters, 4 in particular, different stages, different societal classes from different backgrounds in the driver's seat of this war epic. We've got female spies, generals, and all these different ways that women and dependents have always shaped and been shaped by conflict. And so we really wanted to put them in the driver's seat. And so we take on the events of the Iliad and we try to show that maybe these things happened, but maybe the reasons that you think they did were not what you think they were. So that's the approach that we took.
Awesome. That sums it up exceptionally well and leads into my next questions. I love that you touched on like the different roles of women in conflicts because we're going to dive into that. So my next question is, in Daughters of Bronze, Andromache is a trained warrior princess. Definitely a new twist on the narrative. And one that introduces a lot of conflict in the story, both for her as a character and in her world that she's in. Describe your research into ancient Greek warrior women and where you drew inspiration for her.
Yes, so she was a fascinating character because one of the things that people often say or wonder is, do some of these retellings that we are doing now place kind of anachronistic values? Like, are we going in and putting modern values in ancient texts? And it's fascinating because that to us could not be farther from the truth. So Andromache, the basis of her character on some things that are extremely real, that are not as well known. So we combined in her character both the wife of Prince Hector, Andromache, and there was another Andromache, Amazon Andromache. So we kind of fused these things together. But what was our inspiration were the lines in the Iliad in which Hector relies heavily on his wife's counsel. He is not, this is not a typical relationship that you would see. He relies on her counsel, he seeks her out, and she is basically his backbone, and she is his person. And we thought that was such a beautiful and underrepresented thing, that was always what spoke to us. And one of the relationships that we were most interested in diving into. And so when we really looked into it, the concept of warrior women, right, is not new. It is actually ancient. And, these women were not actually based on anything Greek. So the Greeks had a much more, I would say women were in a much smaller box. Their power was limited. And we know a lot about these ancient periods because the Greeks wrote everything down, and we are so glad for that. But what we see is with the Amazons, who we now know are based on many of the Scythian cultures of the Eurasian steppe, like they were in contact with so many societies that had different gender roles than they did. Societies, like we said, the Scythians, where women were warriors, they were leaders, and even the Anatolian cultures, like the ones that we dove into for Horses on Fire and Daughters of Bronze, these women were healers, they were leaders. For example, in the Hittite realm, the queen, the Tawananna, had almost as much power as her male counterpart and continued to rule after he died. Some of Pudahepa was our model for Andromache. We were like, this is an Anatolian raised, like leader, a woman, a princess, and we wanted to use those cultures and those backstories to kind of inform her character. So there was a lot of power there to play with. And it was all based on what we know now for these amazing civilizations that until recently were lost. Like they were lost. We're just uncovering all these amazing things about them now. And it is fascinating. And I think that we both, Ashley and I both wish that it was more understood in popular culture, that these Amazons, they're not, these fetishized warrior women that the Greeks made up. They were based on women that lived and fought and had lives that had a huge impact, even if they were not, written down themselves in their own words.
Yeah, that is so awesome. I was thinking about something that you just said about the fetishization that the Greeks that wrote stuff down did. I was reading something recently, and it was talking about, I don't know, it was some article, and it was talking about the perspective of the people writing things, and like the little like comedic things that they would say like in their plays, like Euripides and the Bacchae, and like how they would like, put little jabs in there on things. And one of them was like, obviously acting like a woman is like unmanly or like undesirable or whatever. And just like thinking about that being the lens of the time, that's
100%. And yeah, there's so much value. Like we need Herodotus, we need Thucydides, but they are writing from a very specific perspective, and they are coming into contact with cultures and societies that were the other, right? Yeah. And so their views are going to be shaped by the norms of their cultures and their times, and they're going to interpret those things a specific way. And we are so indebted to the fact that we have this information, but a lot, because the writing was not as, in some of these other societies, some of them were nomadic, which is a whole nother thing, because, what is civilization? Is it building cities? Is it doing these things? Like, can people be even like the nomadic cultures have sometimes been overlooked because their mark on the land was less, but that doesn't mean that their impact was less. And so, yeah, it's really interesting when you're teasing these things out to see what some of these blind spots were and how we've now taken them as our own, when archaeology and other things are really showing us that, revealing them for what they are, which is not always what they were represented to be.
Yeah. I have like Google alerts set up to like send me like cool little articles and stuff on things. And I think they just found a grave near Anatolia, and they were talking about how like there was like this warrior woman buried there, and she had like a horse with her and like swords and helmets and like a whole bunch of armor. And they were like theorizing like, oh yeah, this must have been like all the people that she killed in battle and like all these kinds of things. And it was around that area too, and so there were a lot of people who were drawing parallels to like the Amazons and stuff. And
there are thousands of female
yeah.
warrior graves.
Yeah,
thousands of them. And in the past, they assumed that just because somebody was buried with weapons, that it was a male.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that is not the fact. And so now we're going back and seeing all these things, and it's pretty amazing. But not just even warriors, but healers, shamans. Like, there's so many ways that women wielded power. And we like to think that, that in the past we've moved forward in all these different ways. And when you really look back, in some cultures, some places, women had tremendous amounts of power that we could learn a little bit from them, I think, as opposed to, the opposite. There are things to see and to learn from.
Yeah.
Not that it was great. Not that it was always great. You don't want to be anybody in the Bronze Age. It was a rough time.
No.
Did not work out well for anybody. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for going back and
yeah. I really love how you, and I don't know if you intended to do this or not, but the conflict between Andromache and like the culture of Troy and the elite and like all the little hoops she had to jump through to like be heard. I love how you kind of paralleled that with the reality, like what we were just talking about with like Herodotus and like their view on strong women. I like how you parallel that in the story. Like, you have a strong warrior, badass woman who's coming up against the patriarchy, as she was, her culture was remembered in history, as well as like the fictionalized story. So that's cool. I don't know if you intended
as old as time. No, because it's relevant. Because when you read these things and you see how we've been coming up against the same things since before recorded history. I mean,
yeah. So I'm gonna piggyback off of something that you said a little bit about healers and shamans, and I'm gonna segue into Helen, because Helen in your story is a practiced healer. Also a new twist. She has a connection to the mother goddess and derives her power and healing abilities from her. And you don't really go into a lot of detail about who this goddess is, which I liked, but I also I want to know. So was this based on a particular deity or cult that you discovered during your research? Or tell me a little bit more about how you crafted Helen's character and her backstory.
We've actually never had this question before, and which is amazing, and I'm so glad that you asked it. So the truth, Helen's character was based on our desire to right some things that we saw as wrongs that have been done to her. Like, she definitely has had a bad rap for a long time, and that never felt very convincing to us. So we figured massive conflicts like the Trojan War are probably happening for reasons that are political, geopolitical, less to do with how beautiful somebody is, and not that family things did not play into some of these conflicts of the ancient past. I mean, a lot of times they did, but it was always as an easy thing to understand that was, encapsulating all these other things that were below the surface, not spoken of. So for her, we wanted to show that she could have power that was different than the type of power, for example, that someone like Andromache would wield. A power that was very internal and quiet and honored the experience of a lot of women over time who were overlooked and viewed and valued based on their, physical attributes. But there was so much more going on. So when we were looking at her, we were like, okay. And there are some backs, like they mentioned her with herbs, and there are some things that we drew from the literature to say, okay, we're going to focus on these aspects of her. And so that's where that was born. As far as her connection to the unnamed one, we never really even say it's mother goddess or to that. For us, it was leaving it up to the reader to put there what feels right and true to them. So in her character, that's what felt right for her and for us. But that is a very, when we're talking about reality and history, the concept of things that cannot be seen, unseen things are, that was very real to the people of the past. And even so today, I would say to a lesser extent, but that is a huge aspect of what they considered their world. And so we wanted to leave that as a space to explore for people who are reading it in a way that felt true to them, who she's talking to and why. Is it the mother goddess? Is it someone else? Is it what is it that she is connected to? And so we do not want to insert ourselves into that, but to leave that for the reader. As far as the mother goddess, we went down the mother goddess rabbit hole because so many ancient cultures across the world have the divine feminine. Like the mother goddess is one of the oldest symbols that we have of humans trying to understand their world. Life, death, rebirth, all these things are really encapsulated in a feminine deity or entity. And what we loved about it so much is that it stands in such a stark contrast even to the Greco-Roman pantheon and all the things that developed later. But this is a much more ancient belief in some of the earliest villages, societies, like that. These are the images that we find. And so there's obviously hot debate about, were they matriarchal? Were they egalitarian? But our what we think is that things were a lot more egalitarian in the ancient past. And then that changed, whether it was through agriculture or whatever. But we wanted to go in and explore this because there were societies, for example, like the ancient Minoans, who, were before the Mycenaeans came and took over. Like their society, we think, was actually matriarchal. And they worshipped goddesses that were the snake goddess that like they wielded power. Or in other places in Anatolia where we see these things, like that is we took many different things from these like ceremonies, what we know of this, and we put it together in our version of the mother goddess. And also we added the Hittite Hanahana, which is the great grandmother. And what we loved is the way that the mother goddess and Hanahana, the grandmother, like they're wielding power in a very specific, different way that we thought represented the way a lot of women have wielded power in the past. And so for us, that became a very important, sorry, this just popped up, a very important way to kind of look at that through that lens. And so we wanted to explore that.
I love that. I love everything that you did with Helen. And I totally agree that her character has been slandered, smeared, just like everything. Like, so I loved that you gave her that backstory. And I love it even more that you created her intentionally to be just a space for the readers to see themselves in her character and draw their own strength from her character. That just makes it so much better.
Thank you. I mean, power is so different. So we have so many different ways to be strong, right? And so many of them have been overlooked and are still overlooked. And I feel like that's what she represented for us.
Yeah. And, I love also that, like, in your retelling, she's not really there because she chose to be there. And I feel like, that is a common theme even for women today. Like, we are doing things we don't want to do. We're in situations we don't want to be in. We don't see a way out. Like, there are struggles that everyone, male or female, have. And reading a character that can draw from that inner strength and that inner power is such a strong theme in here. And I love it so much.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that so much. We really wanted to write a Helen that people would not expect and they would feel like they could know. And I'm like, why is Paris always getting a pass?
Yeah.
He's always getting a pass, I'm like, what's up with that? So we tried to take him too and make him psychologically more nuanced and interesting. So their relationship is very interesting to dive into.
Yeah, for sure. But like as I was reading it, it felt so like it wasn't surprising to me as I was reading it. I was just like, oh, this feels real. Like, this feels like the story behind the story. Like, there was like some of these retellings And I've read a bunch of them, and I love something or a lot about all of them, because they're fascinating. I love seeing the new perspectives and the deep dives into these characters. But this is the first one where I was reading it, and like I never raised an eyebrow at anything. Like, why did this happen? Like what were they thinking here? Never. And like especially with Helen and Paris and their relationship, and like his motivations and her motivations. Like, as I was reading it, I was like, this makes perfect sense. Like,
thank you.
This
we
is
felt when we've been so deep into this for so long, and that always was the thing that, like, we came into it with a very specific, like, what we thought was really going on that we talked about for a very long time. And so, like, yeah, that makes us so happy. We're very glad to hear that, because that's how it felt for us. But you never know,
Yeah.
if your interpretation is going to be what somebody else sees. I'm sure some people, have very strong feelings about characters that have had the stamp for a really long time, and anytime you're deviating from that, you're gonna ruffle a few feathers maybe, and sometimes you're gonna be like, you're gonna reach people that are like, oh yes, I always felt that. So it's one of the beauties of mythology and adding to that canon, because you can just explore it from all these different angles.
Yeah, it really added depth to the whole political nightmare that was Troy.
Yes.
Like, you've got these enemies at your gates, and you've got these disgruntled people inside. You have this woman at the middle of it, and it's like, it really added depth to the conflict in a way that felt very kind of shallow and weird before. Just like an entire civilization launching a campaign because a single woman got kidnapped. Like, not to say that that couldn't happen, or didn't happen, but like you said, like, there's always other things that are at the heart of this, like simmering tensions and things like this that have been building over time, and they just need that one little thing to be the spark to like actually put action into their feelings. So I feel like Helen was definitely that, and the way that you wrote her into the story brought that out so much better. So anyway, I love it. All right, so I'm going to move on to Rhea now. So Rhea spends a lot of time in the enemy camp as a spy. Describe your process in researching what these camps would look like and how they might operate day to day, including the roles of slave women and their own power hierarchies. When did you know this would play such a huge role in the plot, and where did your inspiration for it come from?
So Rhea's spy plotline was one of the very first things we conceptualized with these books, because so much of the Iliad, and so there's the main events of the Iliad that everybody knows, mostly focused on Hector and Achilles and Patroclus, but that's not what's taking place in the majority of the Iliad. It's all these other things that, unless you're reading it a million times, people are not as familiar with. And one of the main storylines is a lot of espionage that is going on. A lot of very bad espionage, may I add. Like, not convincing people walking around. But it's a huge part of how Homer represented the conflict occurring. And we were like, yes, this feels right. In the Bronze Age, when the Trojan War, or the events that inspired the Trojan War, happened, this would definitely have played, realistically, a very large role in the conflict. But what would be the most realistic way that this would transpire? And so that's where we were like, okay, who is the most likely to be able to walk around? And we thought to ourselves, this was going to be where our shadow army comes in. And so Rhea, for us, she's based on the servant who's holding Hector and Andromache's son in the farewell scene, who was never given a name. So we knew we wanted her to be our female spy, and we envisioned a way. And so when we were figuring out like how this would physically work, we relied mostly, beyond just going in depth with the Iliad and seeing what Homer said about it, we also went deep into the topography and the archaeology of the site of Hisarlik, which is where most people believe is the site of ancient Troy. We are definitely in that camp. And so we tried to we wanted to see what the land looked like at that time. And so what we tried to do is we made a version of this that we felt matched both Homer and the and the realities of the space itself. And so that's how we try to anchor it in something very, very real. And it was interesting because so many critics, when we have looked at Homer and in the past, the past several hundred years, are like, oh, complete mythology, work of fiction, because none of it really lined up until recently. They discovered that with all the changes to the landscape and all these new archaeological discoveries, it's an incredible down to what side of the wall was the weakest and how they're shaped. There's so many details that Homer, who recorded it hundreds of years after it happened, things that were passed down orally, there's so many details that checked out,
Mm-hmm.
So that for us was so fascinating, because we were like, this is something that we were interested to play with, and to set it up in a way that maybe would be recognized by the people who lived it. That was our goal. We try to do as much of that as possible. But yeah, Rhea, we loved her character. We were so inspired by the invisible, those who are like the shadows in every conflict. And she represented us. And there are hierarchies no matter where you go. It's a natural human thing to create hierarchies.
Right.
Whether you're with an enslaved person in an enemy camp, or, a king, queen in a, ancient civilization. And so we try to kind of blend these things together, Homer and archaeology, history and mythology, in a way that felt gritty and realistic. And her character does a lot of our quiet walking and quiet scene. And she's everywhere.
Yeah.
Without scene, which felt very realistic.
Yeah. So what really struck me was the way you used her to fill in the details about the world. When you read the Iliad, you don't have those details, like you were saying. Like, that there are women there because the very first opening chapter is, the priest coming to get his daughter back. Because she's a slave. So they're there, and of course you have Briseis. So they're there, and but there's not really anything described about like what they're doing from day to day.
Yep.
Like, when Agamemnon's out doing his war stuff, what's Chryseis doing? Like, is she just sitting there waiting for him to come back? Like, I love how you used this terrible aspect of the story to create and fill in the gaps of the world and really immerse the reader in ancient Troy. It was just an aspect that I feel like a lot of books don't go into, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It's just kind of an overlooked detail. I think a lot of people like to focus on like the war part and the heroism and the slashing and the the anger and like all of the passionate aspects of the story, but they don't want to focus on the mundane, if you will.
And that's where some of the greatest drama occurs, I feel like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I really loved how you crafted that, because I don't think a lot of people think about the enormous amount of people that the Achaeans had accumulated as slaves.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Right. And it's interesting too.
Where are they all? Like, they're not just tied up to a post, they're doing things to keep the camp functioning and running, like laundry and baths and cooking and cleaning and like all of these things that nobody even really thinks about. They just think, they took the women and they're doing things to women, and like that. It's like that's the only thing people really associate, but there was so much more going on, and I love how you created Rhea to explore that.
Thank you. We are inspired by our own background. So for us, we approached it less as, people from a classics background. We love and read the classics, and we both, but our backgrounds are political science and history and theology. But when we approached this, the thing that we wanted to really bring out is the thing that brought us together as two young girls who were drawn together by stories. We met on a military base overseas when we were, 15, and our whole entire lives we've been part of the, modern warrior culture as dependents. That's how we grew up. And then as adults, like we were part of that community for most of our lives. And so we've seen the reality of what these things look like for the people inside them. And we thought to ourselves, it cannot be that different. It's always the same. Women and children are always there. Dependents are always there. And they're always doing so much of this, but they're always written out of the story. They're the shadows. And so for us, that is what we were so dedicated to showing how women have always been there. They've always been like, this war is not the domain of men. Okay. It is the domain of everybody who's there, and everybody has a part, and everybody suffers disproportionately so. And not only that, but women have always had power because of the bonds that they forge with each other. And so we're not victims all the time, even though things happen, that there is tremendous agency and power to be found in stories of the past and of the present. And that's what we wanted to sort of honor in the way that we wrote this. And she became our vehicle to really show that.
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
Oh, thank you.
Nailed it. Okay, so the next question is, Daughters of Bronze covers the part of the Trojan War that is told in the Iliad. So like Horses of Fire is kind of like the prequel that's, you know, diving into these characters and where they come from. But the Daughters of Bronze is like really like where the Iliad picks up. There are dozens of characters in Homer's original. How did you choose which characters to develop the most? And we've already focused on the female characters a little bit. But like, you know, specifically, you know, like Ajax, Styanax, Cassandra, were there other texts and legends that you drew inspiration from to help add depth to these characters? Like, how did you choose those as opposed to any of the other dozens of characters?
Yeah. So just from reading the Iliad as many times as we did and loving it as much as we did, some of the most incredible moments feature some of these characters. Moments that if you're reading it, that you will never forget. And those Sarpedon and Ajax the Great, these are some of, and Achamas, these are some of the names that when we were reading it as young people and then again as adults, these are the scenes and the moments in that story that really hit us. And they're there even in the original text for anybody to see. And these are the characters that fascinated us because we were like, they have such some of the best moments in the whole epic, but they're virtually unexplored. And that's what, like Ajax the Great, we've always, like all these characters, when we went in, we knew that these are the ones that we wanted to really dive into. Ajax the Great, who's in modern portrayals is always like this big, giant, kind of not very bright. And that's not who he is in Homer's Iliad. And like, he's an incredibly good, like he's got all these, he's got an incredible strategic mind. He's a defender. He's not even an attack. Like all the moment when he's holding off the entire Trojan army at the ships. Like I remember reading that as a kid and being like, this one man is running, and like that, the drama of that moment is like, oh, we just wanted to dive in. And so in some of these characters, some of the Trojan allies who were not Trojan, but were from other places that came to fight, in these moments and in these characters, we saw stories that we were the most interested in telling. We wanted to tell. And then, of course, there's Hector, who has never really had his moment when he's arguably the greatest hero. You know, in all, like to me, even Homer, who's writing as a Greek hundreds of years later, cannot deny the fact that, you know, Hector is the ultimate badass, you know, but in the end, he has to run because it's the only way it makes sense. But you can't even you have to give him his flowers because he represented, you know, these ideals that later were very, very valued by the Greeks and Polis and all these other things. So we wanted to take those moments and explore them and to really go in deep and to show how these characters had their own stories that were worth telling.
Yeah. So that's a great lead into my next question, which is when writing the motivations for why certain characters and certain things from Homer's account feel inconsistent with their character portrayal. For example, Hector running from Achilles, Ajax killing his own Achaean allies, Odysseus killing Hector's son. Like all of these things that Homer didn't really go into a lot of detail about, but like when we read them, it's like, why? What is that? Doesn't feel quite right. How did you know, like, how you would show these decisions and these motivations for them And did you know these things before you started writing, or did some of them kind of come to you as you were writing?
Most of them we knew. So from the very first words to the last. So we didn't have as structured of a plan as we probably should have, but we knew like what these moments were. And these are what we were always writing towards, and the motivations, which we had sat with for a long time because the characters felt extremely real to us. And yeah, so that was always very, very intentional. And you'll see even from the very beginning to the very end. Oh my goodness, I think actually my computer is starting to die here. I've had my computer is on its last leg. I might have to move us.
Okay. Uh-oh, you froze.
Over, if that's okay. Oh no.
Just bear with us. We're going to get her back, I hope. I hope you guys are enjoying so far. While we wait for her to plug in and return to us, please think of any questions you want to ask. If you guys have not read this book yet, it is available in our bookshop.org. It is so good. I'm obsessed with the Iliad. I've been obsessed with the Iliad. So reading or retelling, it would have to be really, really on point for me to want to read it. And there's so much historical significance to this. Not only like just a fascinating read, but like as we've already discussed in some of the comments, just all the historical research they pulled from to develop these characters, develop the world. It really made me ask a lot of questions. It made me do a lot of Googling. It really got me interested in the Trojan War period in time and really wanting to know more about the actual historical significance going on at this time. So if you are a history buff and you're obsessed with anything to do with the ancient world and you like fiction, historical fiction, pick this one up. You will not be sorry. It's so good. Hopefully we will get Danielle back very, very soon. I had just a couple more questions to ask her. But if you guys have any questions, please get them ready. And let me see, message her really quick. So, Daughters of Bronze, I'm just going to keep going here. Daughters of Bronze is book 2 in a duology. I don't think you necessarily have to read the first book to really get the historical significance. But if you're really going to dive into the characters, her first book, Horses of Fire, goes more into the cultural aspects of ancient Troy, where Andromache came from, Helen. Like it really dives into the history during this time period and some of the cultural mores and some of the things like that to craft these characters and build these characters up for what happens in Daughters of Bronze. Horses of Fire is also available in our bookshop. So if you click the QR code here, it'll take you to where you can purchase both of these awesome books. I sound like a salesperson right now, but I'm just like geeking out over these books because they're really awesome and fascinating and interesting. If you guys have read, if anybody watching has read a Greek myth retelling or any mythological retelling or any historical ancient history books lately that you recommend, post them in the chat. I would love to take them, check them out and see if there's something there that we would like to discuss on our bookshop, on our live book club discussions. So post those in the chat if you have any recommendations. Danielle says her computer is completely dead. She's trying to connect from her phone. Fingers crossed. So while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and put in a plug for some of SASA's other live events going on. SASA does Archeo Gaming, which is super fun, but it takes, it's gaming. So we're playing video games based in ancient cultures. Uh-oh, let's see. No. Based in ancient cultures. And it's exploring like some of the historical aspects and other things. It says I'm waiting for the host. Hold on, sorry. Let me see if I can get her back here. Ah. There she is. Can you hear me? I cannot hear you if you're speaking. Okay, so we did not have audio, so she's going to try and come back in just a minute. Apologies, everybody. Sometimes this happens. This is the technological hiccups that we have to jump through sometimes. Here we go. Let's try this. There she is.
I am so sorry. My computer is on its absolute last leg, and it almost didn't start today when I was trying to get it to go.
No.
So it picked the worst moment, but I'm on the floor. I apologize. It's the only
No
way that
worries.
it's turning on.
I was just talking about how awesome your book is and hyping up both of your books.
I appreciate that. Clearly, we belong. I belong. Ashley is the tech person. She's the one whose equipment always works. That's why when you're just stuck with me, I'm the one that would still be communicating with pigeons if, I belong in another time.
I do too. No worries. Okay, so I think honestly, I may have only had one more question, and
Okay.
that is if the question hasn't already been answered, why did you write Horses of Fire and Daughters of Bronze?
Awesome. And I'm going to try to make this worth the wait that everybody just
Okay.
had while I try to get this. So we wrote this book because we became friends. Uh, our entire upbringing and childhood felt like it pointed in the direction of retelling the warrior's epic, the Iliad, which we read as young people and identified with in so many ways. And they say, write what you know. And it's so weird that the thing that we felt that we knew was the Iliad, but we also wrote it because there were so many things in there, spaces between the lines, that we were like, okay, that's where we feel like we can bring something that is not just that is true on an emotional level, that we feel like we can contribute something that is unique to us. So with our own friendship, watching the people in our own lives, we knew that there was a story there, a drama that was behind the drama, and maybe even be the reason why Homer did these things, because he's writing them down so many years later, having heard, we have some things that we know are historically accurate and others that are clearly just, because that's what they didn't even know many of these civilizations, because they were all disappeared. Like, they're writing from a period of darkness, from a darkened perspective. So we were like, okay, we can bring in not only the emotional truths, the things that we feel like we can bring, but we can also add now the history and the archaeology that Homer didn't have access to, in telling the story. And that's what we really were kind of motivated to do, and in doing, to empower the women and the children, and to shine a light in those dark places that we felt like could use a little bit of love, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Something that you just mentioned, it's kind of been in my head the whole conversation, but you said that Homer didn't have the archaeology, which he definitely didn't. I mean, they say he was blind, right? I don't know if that's true or not. But I was just thinking that, so Homer lived like, what, 700, 800 BC? Isn't that around the
Several
time?
hundred years.
And then the Trojan War took place somewhere like 1200
BCE.
BC. That's only like 400 years, 500 years tops. If you think about it, we have castles that are 600-700 years old in in Europe and places like in Asia that are still standing. If you think about it, Troy was probably still there.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's kind of like, that kind of gives me chills.
Absolutely. And so many people think that he had to have seen the ruins or have been told about the ruins. And many of the things that were passed down were checked out, either because when they were originally created and then passed down, they were based on that truth, or because later they saw. But what he did not have is so many of the civilizations and the peoples that who the Trojans were, or the Hittites, the Luvians, these people had all disappeared. Like, they were erased from memory by the time that Homer was there. So he had no way of knowing who they might have actually been. And so he's filling in with his Greek world, which makes perfect sense, because you're going to write what you see, and there's a lot of his time in it. So you can really see what was the past that was passed down orally, what was then kind of added to it that came from his period, the Greek Dark Age. And so it was interesting, like, pulling on those threads, and there was a lot of space there to play. And yeah, it was, but yeah, there's, it's both frighteningly accurate in certain ways, and also very, like, blind in other spots. Like, that's a terrible one, but like definitely there were things that were missing, that he did not have access to. And so putting those together was one of the most fun things that we did.
Yeah. Along that line, though, like, those different peoples had disappeared by Homer's time, but he still mentions that they were there.
Some of them don't get any mention, which is hilarious.
That's true.
Like, some of, like, the Hittites he doesn't mention at all, and they were the reigning power in Anatolia at this time, because he didn't even know. Like, they just disappeared off everything was just gone. And the Bronze Age, the collapse of the Bronze Age, which Troy is sort of a symbol of, the world completely changed. I mean, it was unrecognizable. They went backwards in time. That's why they call it a Greek Dark Age, because we don't know anything about it, because of how just everything fell apart in a way that is almost unprecedented in
Mhm.
historical times. So it was a very heavy, major world shift that occurred that Troy almost is a symbol of, which is why we think that it was passed down. The tale of Troy is almost like a symbol of the late Bronze Age collapse that changed the face of the world and this part of the world forever. And we think that, you know, there was a lot of that went missing and went lost when
Mhm.
all these cities burned.
Yeah.
And when the past was forgotten and people find themselves in a very desperate reality that then gave birth to the Greek gold, you know, to the classical age. So yeah, it's fascinating if you really think about what they
Yeah.
knew and what they didn't know and how they're understanding their own past.
Yeah. For sure. Well, thank you so, so much for coming to talk about Daughters of Bronze. I'm going to put the QR code back up here one more time for our watchers and listeners. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat while we have Danielle here.
Yeah.
And
And
if you
so
haven't,
sorry. Again, I'm so sorry for the technological issues. I clearly need a new computer. I think that's what I'm going to have to get tomorrow.
I feel like, yeah, technical difficulties. It's something that we got to deal with.
Yeah.
It's just
I've
part
been
of it.
I've been doing interviews like this because I have to keep my screen at a certain angle so that it doesn't shut down. I've been doing this for like 5 months.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah, I've reached the end. I've reached the end now of I can't push it any longer.
We're done. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it sounds like a new computer is in the works, especially since you're an author.
Kind of need it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so thank you everybody for sticking with us and for participating, watching us discuss this book. Please check it out in our bookshop.org. If you purchase the book from there, SASA is supported through a certain percentage of the profits there through bookshop.org. Thank you again. This has been awesome.
Thank you for your amazing questions and for having me. And yeah, we, can't wait to do it again, hopefully.
Yes. All right.